The TMT Learning Foundation respectfully acknowledges that we live, learn, and gather on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Treaty 7 nations, the Siksika, the Kainai, and Kainai of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Eöther, Stoney, and Nakota nations, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goochestony bands, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. We honor the original caretakers of this land, and we commit ourselves to relationships grounded in respect, learning, and reconciliation.
So good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the youth criminal justice system. There's a lot of information that I could share with you about the system. However, I only have 10 minutes, so I've tried to pull out the most important information that I'll share with you today. So I've worked in the criminal justice system for a long time. I've experienced it professionally and personally. So professionally, I've worked as a correctional officer with Renee here at the youth jail. I've worked as a probation officer in the community, and then I've also worked with the Calgary Police Service in their diversion and their gang prevention program. But before I got into working for the justice system, I was actually in the justice system. So let me tell you the story. So my parents immigrated to Canada from Africa with $20 in their pocket. So we grew up very poor. And so one day I made the decision to shoplift. And so I remember being handcuffed. I remember being taken to a back room, being questioned. So the police were called, and then I was questioned. I had a bad attitude. I didn't respond to their questions. I was not cooperative. And so what the police officers decided to do, they could have given me a warning, but instead, because I wasn't cooperative, they decided to criminally charge me. And so they gave me a court date, and I went to the court date with my parents. It was probably the most embarrassing and scary thing I've ever had to do. I went to court, I waited for the judge to call my name, I went up to the little box, and I waited for the judge to talk to me. And so the judge said, "Do you plead guilty or not guilty?" And I pleaded guilty because I shoplifted. And so the judge referred me to the program. It was called Alternative Measures at that time. And I had to meet an alternative measures officer, and they gave me 100 hours of community service. So how do you stay out of the criminal justice system? So some examples are go to school, hang out with some positive friends, sports and activities, have a mentor. If you need someone to talk to, you can connect with a counselor. You can volunteer. If you're 15 years old, you can work. And healthy lifestyle. For example, after school, you can go to the gym. And then routines. And if you don't know what programs are out there, you can always call 211. 211 is a great resource. You can call them and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a counselor. This is what I'm struggling with. Do you have any ideas?" And they will be like, "Yep. We know exactly who you can call. You can call the Calgary Counseling Center."
Hi everyone, thanks so much for the invitation, for the welcome. My name is Lizette Tejada. I'm an MLA, that means Member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, and so I was elected in 2023, and it's been an exciting time in Alberta politics. But it was also a long journey here. And so I'm an opposition member. That means I'm a member of the NDP caucus. I like to focus on the multiculturalism piece and how we can create welcoming spaces, how we can make things accessible for people. Justice is one of those big issues. We grew up exceptionally poor, and that meant that often there was a struggle to put food on the table, to pay rent, and because of not being from Canada originally, there was a lot of challenges involved in sort of figuring out, who do I go to if I need help for this thing or that thing? And if you were in an affordability impacted situation, which we were, there's a lot of struggles that come with that. My father was an alcoholic. And we were in a situation where there was domestic violence. So pretty difficult upbringing. And at the time, because my mother didn't have command of the English language, she didn't understand what she had, where her rights sat, right? What she could do about the situation that she was in. Eventually, we were able to leave that situation. It became quite unsafe, and she was going to, I heard it mentioned legal aid earlier, so she was going to legal aid lawyers, and still navigating language issues. I was 14. I was her translator, right? And so the way all of that impacts the work that I do now is I'm always thinking about root causes. So they talked a little bit about what can lead to an interaction with law enforcement, right? And all of the processes that are involved there. And I'm really thankful for all the work that you all do.
So hi everyone, Renee Clement. I have worked at the Calgary Young Offenders Centre for the past 16 and a half years now. So I have been there a long time. You young folks in the room probably longer than you've been alive now. That's my new stick every time somebody comes into custody, that I have been in that centre for a long time. The wording of our building has changed. Within the past few years, we've also added an adult side of the centre as well. So our staff are required to both work on the youth side and the adult side. For my presentation, I'm solely focusing right now on what we do on the youth side and what that experience looks like for everybody on that side, and then what we're trying to do to bring that community connection piece back and how we're trying to support, as Ismat talked briefly about, that reintegration back into the community and what that looks like from a center perspective. So this is what our building looks like. It has been around since 1988. We currently have about 45 youth in custody. When I started in 2009, we were sitting at just over 100 youth. And so with the implementation of the YCGA in the early 2000s, it's taken a little bit to adopt and implement some of those changes, but our youth population has dropped pretty significantly since then. Okay, so it is harder to come into custody, but I also find then once you enter the system, it is harder to get out of the system. Okay, once you come into custody, if there's any breaches or things that happen, it is easier to come back into custody and then stay into custody with that system. So what it looks like for our center, the Young Offender Center, so you need to either be remanded on charges or sentenced to stay at CYOC. We house youth who have committed any offenses between the ages of 12 and 17. So Ismat touched on that age. Those ages are set out for youth under the YCGA. If there is a charge committed during that time, we will house people up until their 20th birthday. So at that point in time when somebody turns 20 is when we start to adjust or integrate them into the adult system. So we have 2 units, just that age between 12 and 20 is already a stretch enough to have to house anybody older than that in our system. We do have male and female youth in our system. The majority at this point in time are male youth.
How long does the record stay open for?
For a youth record? So there's 2 types of offenses under the criminal code. I'll try not to go overly in depth about them, but there's something, the Crown decides, okay, most charges to go by summary conviction or by indictable. And summary means that it's something more minor. We're looking at something like a shoplifting charge where it is a smaller item. They all fall under this theft under category, but it's something smaller as opposed to maybe a car where it still might be under $5,000, but they might choose to go by way of indictment, which means it's more serious. So if it's, and this is a good, if you're ever in that situation, to know to talk to a lawyer, to talk to your probation, to make sure you know how they proceeded. So if it's a summary offense, at the end of the last day of your sentence, so a probation order, anything like that, at the end of the last day, it is 2 years to stay. You have to be crime-free for 2 years, so no fail to comply, nothing new that you've picked up. 2 years, and then for an indictable offense, it is 5 years.